According to the latest research report from Zillow, U.S. homes, 53% of U.S. homes have lost value over the last year. And what I think would be a very shocking result, because a lot of people have been told to wait for lower interest rates and that would fix the housing market. But instead, what we're finding out, and not just from Zillow, but a lot of different sources, lower interest rates haven't done anything. But either way, we're talking about 53% of U.S. homes have lost value. And Zillow took it even further. They said, of those homes that are losing value, the average decline is somewhere around 10% from the peak. Now, of course, they downplayed that and said, home prices are up substantially since the pandemic, which is absolutely true. But we're sitting here trying to figure out why retailers like Target and Home Depot are suffering while Walmart and TJ Maxx are doing really well. Home prices are a big key ingredient. Plus, they also offer not just home prices, but the entire home sector offers us compelling corroboration that the primary problem in the U.S. economy right now is what we've been saying all along: jobs and incomes. After all, what is it that is keeping home buyers on the sidelines? It's no longer lower interest rates. Maybe rates aren't as low as most people would like. Maybe they're not as low as most people were expecting, but it doesn't matter. Rates are down, and it has had zero impact on the housing market. And in fact, the housing market continues to sink lower and lower with really no end in sight. So we're at the point where not only is it confirming and corroborating the difficulties in the labor market, this housing thing, this macro-led housing bust that we've been describing all summer, is in danger of actually contributing to the downturn in the economy through the psychological wealth effect mechanism. The lower home prices go, and the more that home buyers and homeowners and everybody think that it's going to continue, the more they're going to pull back in their shopping at Target. The more they're going to go to Walmart for toiletries and groceries. And you really do get into, we have another negative factor in this vicious cycle of an economy that's developing as we head into the Christmas holiday season of 2025. So Steve, I know you've been watching the housing market pretty closely, especially from where you are in Orlando. I mean, Florida is one of the top names that you hear in the setback in the housing market, but it's gotten it's not just this one state or one general metropolitan area or another. It's pretty widespread at this point.
Yeah, Jeff, and this really isn't a surprise. Although I kind of funny, we saw Home Depot's earnings, and I think the CFO John Rainey, he was shocked. He's like, "Hey, we thought that low interest rates were going to help here, and it didn't." But it's so obvious because not only, as you said, prices are coming down, but we've been warning about this for a while. That builders are sitting on the largest inventory overhang since 2009. This is a huge problem because they have something a lot of homeowners don't, called margin. So they can cut prices, offer discounts, and they did, and they started to in a bigger way. That's putting downward pressure on the resale market. And as a labor market, so this is a huge issue for a lot of homeowners because some of them need to sell. They need to move. They need to get out. And now they're trapped. And if prices continue to fall, my fear, Jeff, isn't that people are going to be trapped in their home.
Yeah, that's, I think, the other big point that Zillow brought up is the comparisons that we're making here. The last time we saw this many U.S. homes falling in value over this long of a period, maybe more than a couple months, was 2012. We're going back to the depths of the housing bust. Remember those times? Most people would rather forget them. And they also said that, the 9.7% drawdown. Last time we saw something like that, even though, again, housing prices went way higher, they've come down from the peak. The last time we saw this level of widespread decline in home prices was around 2010, 2011, and 2012 at the bottom of the housing bust, the big one a generation ago. So these are pretty substantial numbers. Even if home prices are overall higher, this is a lot for consumers to digest, especially when they're already worried about their jobs and incomes. They're worried about prices rising. They're worried about being able to afford the necessities of life, including housing, but also automobiles and automobile upkeep, along with just groceries. And now your home price starts to go down. You don't really care that your home value might have gone up in 2021 and 2022. What you care about is, today I can see that home prices are going down. If I get stuck, what is that going to mean? That means I'm going to have less home equity than I really thought I did. And you're moving forward into all your planning. It really is another big negative factor. And it is a much bigger negative factor than people seem to realize, because your home is everything. For most people, it is really the major asset they have for not just retirement, but also psychologically. While everybody can point to the stock market that owns stocks, not a lot of people own stock, but a lot of Americans do own houses. And this is a big one, and it's really starting to build. And as you said, Steve, Everybody was interest rates, right? It was lower interest rates was going to fix everything. Just wait till interest rates go down. The Fed starts cutting because everybody believes the Fed cuts and that's where interest rates come from. The Fed starts cutting and this will all magically go away. And then Home Depot says it didn't. And Zillow says it's not turning around. These numbers are getting bigger. So it's not rate cuts, it's macroeconomic fundamentals.
Yeah, in fact, Jeff, even though mortgage delinquency rates are still very, very low, they're starting to tick higher. And so you're starting to see that stress building. And, you look at the subprime auto market, it's kind of really clear is why are people walking away from the vehicles? And it's simple. If you go down and talk to a dealer and ask them, how many people trade in a vehicle with negative equity that gets rolled into their new loan? Well, a lot more than you want to believe. So again, you get behind, the labor market slows, you can't make a payment. Why would you play catch up on something that you got a high interest rate and you're upside down on? And I think that's going to flow down to the housing market if there's further downward price pressure. Because, we come back to rates. And why didn't rates work even though everybody said it would? It's because the Fed told everybody, hey, we're in restrictive territory and we're the ones holding the reins on the economy. If we just let go a little bit, everything's going to take off. And everyone said, great, let's cut some rates and let's let this thing run. And they did, only to find out the reason the Fed's really cutting. And Jeff, this is not the reason you want rate cuts. It's because the labor market's weakening. And granted, we got this kind of one-off non-farm payroll report, but again, underneath it, seasonal work, we're seeing hours worked kind of unchanged largely. We're seeing, wage growth continue to slow, all the wrong signs. So this problem in the housing market, I think it's only going to get worse.
That seems to be the fear from a lot of, you mentioned Home Depot. That wasn't the only one. The Zillow numbers are pretty eye-opening. And yeah, I think the overall marketplace, even the stock market, looked at the payroll reports this week as the correct way. It wasn't, the September number was above 100,000, therefore everything is fine. Everybody just dismissed the September figure and said, look, they're going to revise it down significantly anyway. So at the very best, it's above 100,000, but in all likelihood, it's much less than that. Plus the revisions, as we talked about before, now we have 2 negative payroll reports, 2 of them that are already on the board for the summer, which is not a good sign because this isn't about these negative months. It's about the trend and where those negative months fit into a trend, which is continuing to move in the wrong direction. So what we're really saying is that even the markets took the payroll numbers as more confirmation of what we're seeing in the housing market, along with all these earnings reports from retailers like Target and even Walmart too. The better, you've said this all the time, Steve, the better Walmart does, the worse it is. When rich people are buying toilet paper at Walmart, that's not a good sign. Or TJ Maxx, and there's nothing wrong with TJ Maxx, but when TJ Maxx is doing well, people are struggling because that's where they go when they can't afford other things. So you put all these things together and they're all the same thing. It's not interest rates, it's not the Fed, it's the macro economy, it's the lack of work, it's the lack of hours, it's the lack of income, especially when you adjust for prices. Real incomes are nowhere near enough. And so all of these things point to the same thing. So in many ways, you can't blame homeowners or consumers. Consumer confidence continues to be down in the dumps. You can't blame people for being unconfident because of all of these negatives that keep piling up as we go through the year. In a world where markets swing on every headline, focus matters. That's why Eurodollar University offers its one big weekly theme, a disciplined thematic analysis that you can count on. If you don't have time to go all the way to the depth of Eurodollar University's comprehensive deep dive analysis, but you want to get the next best thing, one big weekly theme is for you. Each week, we pick the one high-impact macro and market theme, and we unpack it from first principles, from fundamentals to real-world implications, so you can see the forest and the trees, drawing from all over the vast Eurodollar University library and canon. What you get with one big weekly theme is a single focused theme each week, unpacked with clarity from sources you will not see anywhere else. Data-driven analysis supported by charts and information pulled from Eurodollar University's other subscriptions and offerings, all in a simple, repeatable framework you'll use week after week. We distill the complexity into a practical, fundamentals-first playbook that you can rely on. This is not about chasing every hot idea. It's about building a disciplined routine that sharpens your judgment during these periods of uncertainty. So if you're ready to make your week count, subscribe to One Big Weekly Theme today. Visit eurodollaruniversity.substack.com or click the link in the description to learn more. You can sample the service or sign up and get started straight away. Eurodollar University, a focused approach to mastering money and macro, one thoughtful week at a time.
Yeah, Jeff, because if we go back to the payroll report, while there was gains, where did we see the losses in warehousing and transportation? It's just kind of a gut punch here saying, look, we have so much inventory from every aspect, all the way from manufacturers down to retailers, that we don't need people because we need people when inventory is moving. And so as we look through the holiday season here, a lot of these businesses, they need to push inventory out the door and in a bad way. My fear is when it doesn't happen, and I don't think it is, this payroll report, and I think this is what the market started to realize is, hey, we're not going to have October or November. The next one we're going to get is after the Fed meeting. By then, it's way too late because the Fed's going to probably be on pause. But based on the trends we're seeing here, this doesn't bode well. And you tie it all back to the housing market. Why are prices coming down? Well, one, young people can't afford prices at this level to begin with. Number two is because the economy is weakening and the labor market's going, and those that have to sell need to cut prices against builders who are aggressively trying to unload things. So it's really a perfect storm here. You can really make the case that I think housing prices are likely to come down even more. Does this spiral out of control? I don't know, but it's not a good trend.
Yeah, that was the other thing that came up too, is that the housing weakness, the housing market has been in the dumps overall for several years now. I mean, part of that was, yes, higher interest rates did have an impact in dropping the housing market off way back in 2022 into 2023. But they are not what has kept the housing market in the doldrums all this time. And again, we thought as soon as rates were going to come down, which, by the way, rates have been coming down for 2 years already. Mortgage rates have been falling since the bond market turned around in October of 2023. And it has not sparked a revival. It hasn't sparked anything in the housing market thus far. But what we're saying and what we're seeing, and we're not the only ones, by the way, I'll give you an example in a second here, is that there is another sort of deterioration that has developed over the last several months, consistent with suddenly a job market that went from some moderate payroll gains, not a whole lot of hiring, but not really a whole lot of losses. And then suddenly it was not really a whole lot of hiring. And now we're seeing more and more job losses. And suddenly at the same time, now we're getting all these signs from the housing market that say something shifted here over the summertime. So let me read you an example. This is from Bloomberg. So mainstream media sources picking up on, hey, there's something bad going on in the housing market. Here's what they said. The housing market has been in the doldrums for 3 years, so it's easy to assume there's nothing new to the weakness there. That's a mistake. The deterioration in housing has taken a fresh turn in recent months with important implications for the economy. The new wrinkle, Steve, prepare to be shocked. The new wrinkle has been a weakening labor market where job growth has slowed dramatically in the middle of the year. Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller, the chief dove, believes that employment likely fell between May and August, and that's what all the data shows. Something that will be clear once the data is revised next year. He's talking about the QCW and the annual revisions. We also learned this week that notice of impending mass layoffs surged in October to one of the highest levels in the past 20 years, which is something that Challenger Gray and Christmas already really told us about. They kind of stole the thunder there, but it's all consistent. So even mainstream, we're talking about Bloomberg, as mainstream gets, saying, hey, by the way, something seems to have snapped in the housing market recently. And oh, by the way, something seems to have snapped in the job market recently. And it's probably a good bet those two things are somehow related.
Well, yeah, particularly as we look across the board, we see delinquencies on credit cards, automobiles, and again, housing is still relatively low, but it's all clear. As you said, Jeff, for a long time, it isn't about prices. It's always been about jobs and wages. And consumers will complain if prices go up, but as long as their wages are going up faster, they can afford it. And that's been the issue all along here, is this economy has not worked for a large number of Americans. And the only end game here is prices do have to come down to the level people can afford them. And that's the problem we're seeing here, because if prices continue to fall, the risk isn't that they're going to go down even more. The risk is that the builders who have borrowed lots of money against all these unsold homes are going to pay a bill every month. And that means their profit margin keeps getting shrunk, just like a lot of major corporations. And when that happens, what do? You start to have fire sales and you start to have clearance. And that means you're going to see a lot of people out of work, because if you're dumping your inventory, you're certainly not building. And that's the risk here. As more and more companies look to dump their inventory of whatever it is, it's going to put pressure all across the board. We could see further declines in housing prices, and again, more unemployment. The cycle here, I think what Bloomberg's talking about is like, look, we hit an inflection point, and not a good one.
Yeah, so you're saying, Steve, that's inflationary, or I mean, that's the argument, right? That's what we hear. The reason the Fed is going to pause in December, which, by the way, I don't think they will, but the reason they're talking about pausing in December is they think there's tariff inflation in there somewhere. But yet, what we're talking about is what China's been talking about is oversupply all across the economy because of under demand. And this is a key point that I think goes to why there was such widespread home price declines. 53% of U.S. homes are down in value over the last year. That's enormous. And why that's the case is something that you and I have been talking about for the last several years, really since we started on the show together. What we said was, you wait, you watch. What's going to happen is the economy has to go through the pandemic process, which means at some point it has to normalize. And when we talk about normalize, everybody thinks the economy normalizes to the nominal value. No, no, no. We said it's got to normalize to the basic fundamentals, which are volume and incomes. And that's the kind of scary thought here, not just in housing, but also the goods economy and everything else. So in housing, that means prices would have to come back down to where people perceive that they can afford it in an environment that's not going to be like 2021, where jobs are coming back from the pandemic, or incomes are growing not fast enough, but they're still growing. The entire housing market has to normalize to perceptions of income and reality of income that is a lot less than people are anticipating. So this 9.7% average drawdown that Zillow was talking about is likely just the start of the trend as we continue to move forward. And like Steve said, it's not just about housing, or it's not just about goods inventory. You're going to see the same adjustments in places like services. And we've already seen that. I mean, why is Amazon laying off workers? Why are other companies like UPS, that's related to the goods economy, but that's a services business. The reason why we're getting layoffs in services businesses is because what we're really going through here is not the typical cycle. It's that normalization process. And housing is one of the most visible angles of it.
Jeff, you're right. I mean, it's not just housing prices or inventories. I mean, let's drive it down to the basics. People can't afford a Chipotle burrito. So if you can't even afford to go out to eat and buy a burrito, how can anyone expect you to buy a home or a car or go out and spend big during the holiday season? It's just completely unrealistic here. So, what we're facing, as you said, is an economy that isn't working, and prices do have to normalize. The problem is, you look at the holiday season here. I think the post office said they normally hire around 40,000, and this year they're only hiring 14. So if you look to all the people that are out of work or marginally employed and said, hey, I could really use some income here to get through these next couple months, those opportunities are going away. And again, you start to look at the risk is as their income drops, spending drops. And like you said, it's not just a normalization. You're going to normalize from this rampant inventory build. How low does it go? Well, it goes until everything can get sold. Where that is, we don't know.
Yeah, so the holiday, I mean, we're already getting a sense that consumers are having to cut back. I mean, we've talked about the Conference Board's numbers on holiday spending. They're saying, they thought from consumers that, holiday spending would be down around 4%. PricewaterhouseCoopers, that's another one that does this big annual holiday spending estimate that they put out. They said that annual holiday spending is expected to decline by 5% on average, which is the first notable drop since 2020. And they also added this. More broadly, 84% of Americans expect to cut back over the next 6 months, citing rising prices, new tariffs, and the higher cost of living. As we've been talking about, it's not really about prices and the cost of living. It's about the fact that incomes are not enough to maintain the cost of living or maintain people's lifestyle. So even a small increase in prices, like we saw with Target, Target raised their prices by a little bit over 2%. And sales dropped by 3%. That's what we're talking about here. And that's what Americans keep saying. And so it's just one place after another. We're already seeing it. And I think what the Zillow estimate said, or the Bloomberg interpretation of them and everything else, is that there has been an inflection point. Something serious did develop over the last couple of months. And that's why you're seeing the stock market not react to NVIDIA. That's why you're seeing Bitcoin down 33% from its high. It has nothing to do with the Federal Reserve. It's all about the fact that the economic fundamentals that we've been talking about for years are finally coming home to roost, and they are looking increasingly ugly.
Yeah, Jeff. So what we're seeing is consumers are getting squeezed, but businesses are as well. And I know you don't think the Fed could be on pause, but we're hearing from a lot of businesses saying, look, they really want to raise prices. And I think I think they're going to try to. I know it's not going to work, but I think they're going to try to. And I think that's what's got the Fed spooked. But if they can't do it, we know exactly what they're going to have to do. They're going to have to lay people off. They're going to go into survival mode and say, look, got a lot of inventory, don't have a lot of demand, don't need any production, so we're going to cut heads. That will get the Fed to cut. So the problem is, again, everybody's like, hey, we need rate cuts, Home Depot, housing market, it'll fix everything. But it's like, they're the rate cuts for the wrong reason. If we were under full employment, everything was moving, the Fed cut, it probably would do something. But when people are standing on the unemployment line, it's not going to do anything.